Hi ladies and gentlemen, Krzysztof the Polish Geek welcomes you to the review of Toy Story 5. And the first thing I have to say is that I do really like the first three Toy Story movies. Like, I'm a fan. I wouldn't necessarily say I'm a fanboy, but I am a fan and I do think they are really great family movies and they're very nostalgic to me. Like, I grew up on the first two Toy Story movies as a kid. Like, Toy Story 2 actually was the very second movie in my life that I ever seen in theaters. So yes, the first two are very nostalgic to me. And then I saw Toy Story 3 when I was like 15. That's when it came out in theaters actually. And it instantly became my favorite one in the series. And I thought they very much formed a great animated family trilogy. And then Toy Story 4 came out and I thought it was actually really great when I first saw it actually. I thought it was as great and comparable in quality to the other three. But over time I ultimately realized I kinda overpraised it, especially that on subsequent viewings I did kinda feel bored at times watching it. Whereas the first three I am always entertained anytime I watch them. The same thing could not be said with Toy Story 4, and again on subsequent watches it did kinda feel boring at times. I still think there are things to really like in Toy Story 4, and I wouldn't go as far as to say that it's insulting the trilogy. Ultimately, the best way to describe it is it's not needed. Ultimately, it's nothing more than an epilogue to Woody's story, or at least it seemed so at first, because now with Toy Story 5 being around, it almost feels like a prologue to a new trilogy that they're planning, with Toy Story 5 clearly being the middle half. But whereas in case of Toy Story 4 I don't really think it was needed, I can't say the same thing about Toy Story 5. Now after I watch Toy Story 5 I say it more than justifies its existence, and I think it's much better than Toy Story 4. Is it as good as the first three? No, and it doesn't need to be, because what matters is, I think it's a really good movie for the whole family that can easily stand on its own. And that's in general something I in general love about Toy Story movies, that they very much are respecting their old fans, and they are very much clearly made in mind of the old fans without leaving the kids behind. And that's why they work so well, that they can easily appeal to their old fans, but also very much bring in the new audience of kids actually. And that's what I think makes the Toy Story movies so great. I mean, Toy Story 3 did have plenty of dark moments, because what works so well about the movie is that it was made specifically for the fans of the first two movies, and that's one of the main reasons the movie works so well and why Toy Story 3 is actually my favorite one in the series. But whatever, Toy Story 5 again, whereas it's definitely not something I would ever say about Toy Story 4. Toy Story 4, at best, the way I would describe it is harmless epilogue of Woody's story. Nothing more, but completely useless and unneeded. That's how I describe Toy Story 4. But Toy Story 5, I might even go as far as to say it's a sequel that I didn't know I needed. Because honestly, I had a really good time with it. I think the callbacks to the original trilogy were really great and completely organic and very much justified. And the story was so relevant to the modern day. And in general, a very timeless story. And it very much kept the original message of the original three movies reinforced through and through. But it did done it in a new, unique way that we all kind of knew from the trailers that was going to be the case. But what's interesting is that the trailers actually didn't reveal all the details to us, which another thing I think is why it works so well. Like, we all knew from the trailers that obviously Bonnie was going to get an iPad, and then the toys were going to be left behind, and then iPad was sort of presented as a new villain of the movie, but I'm glad they didn't really go into the direction. I mean, it certainly started as that, but no. I'm going to give this huge away spoiler right away, because that's not really something I very much predicted right away, but no. Lily Pad is hardly a villain of this movie, more like a misunderstood new toy, kind of in a similar way as Buzz actually was in the first Toy Story movie, which honestly makes me really happy they chose to go in that direction. In fact, I'm gonna go as far as to say Lily Pad is even less of a villain than Gabby is. Again, more like a misunderstood new toy, which I think works very well actually, and honestly further reinforces the message of always toys being there for the kids, because right away it's pretty clear that Lily Pad has pretty much the same intentions as the rest of the toys. She very much wants to be there for Bonnie and very much keep her happy, but because she's a different sort of toy, I mean, she's an iPad that obviously they can't name her due to copyright reasons, but because she's an iPad and has different functions, she obviously thinks that what's good for Bonnie is different than what other toys think, but I think it's, again, it's done very well, and especially that it's also relevant to the modern day, actually, because, trust me, I have a niece and a nephew. I mean, I talk about them quite extensively on this channel whenever it's relevant, and yes, my 7-year-old niece and 4-year-old nephew, especially my nephew actually, they very much love iPads. I mean, they do have plenty of toys and they very much play with them, but especially with my nephew, as soon as you give him an iPad, he just stops playing with all his toys and he just sits on his iPad watching all the YouTube videos and all, which is why my sister generally hides an iPad from him, which ends up to be pretty good for him long term actually. But yes, because I'm experiencing it pretty much second hand, I guess, because I'm not the father, but I'm experiencing it a lot with my niece and nephew. I very much relate to how I see them often playing on iPads and then kind of neglecting their toys. But that's also interesting because then Bonnie actually meets with her friends actually, but they're all sitting on iPads, which also shows that in some ways, sure, you might be sitting with your friends, but if you're all just sitting and playing on iPads, is it really hanging out really? If you just spend on iPads? So yes, I think that, again, the message about toys loving to be played with and always being there for their owners, while many would argue it's pretty much a rehash of the message that the first three movies kept repeating through and through, but what I like about it is that it's actually brought up with a fresh coat of paint, and that's why it works. That way you keep the original themes and overall message very much universal and relevant, while telling pretty much a new, unique story that very much does retain some old elements from the previous stories while very much feeling fresh and new. And what we've constantly been hearing about Jessie being the main focus and the main character, is it true? Yes, totally so. Jessie is very much now the main character, with Woody and Buzz being more like relegated to supporting characters, but I honestly think it very much worked for the movie and it felt so organic and natural. In some ways I think it makes sense, because the thing is, the Woody and Buzz story was very much when they were owned by Andy, but Andy's story is over. It ended in Toy Story 3. So honestly, I actually think that Jessie now getting the main focus, especially that she is also very much an important character in the story, with Woody and Buzz relegated to like supporting characters, but still very much the same Woody and Buzz that we love. I think it worked very well for the story. And anyone who says that oh, Jessie is the main character, they're going woke, I think people have a woke PTSD at this point, because again, like Jessie being the main character, it felt so organic, natural, and the story completely justified it, and I think it made perfect sense. I think if there is one element that you could argue is kind of cringy, it's this wedding scene at the end of the movie that I'm not going to spoil, but at this point it could as well be nothing more than comedy. But again, it's Disney, so you never know. But other than this final wedding scene, I guess I have to say Toy Story 5 more than justifies its existence. Again, with Toy Story 4, I would say we didn't really need it. But Toy Story 5, I say we very much do. And not only that, but now I'm gonna say that I do actually hoping now for Toy Story 6. Not Toy Story 7. Toy Story 6 should be a conclusion. Like Toy Story 3 was a conclusion of Andy's story. Toy Story 6 that would be a conclusion of Bonnie's story. But I also hope they do a time jump just like they did with Toy Story 3. Although maybe not necessarily Bonnie going to college, that would be a rehash, but more like Bonnie being a teenager. Yeah, that would actually be better for Toy Story 6. Now, whatever story they will come up with, Toy Story 5 showed me that those people still very much care for the franchise of Toy Story, and that's why I'm very much optimistic if Toy Story 6 ends up being a reality. And one more thing I want to say is that there wasn't really that much references to Toy Story 4. There were plenty to the original trilogy, especially Toy Story 2 actually. Yeah, Toy Story 2, that's the one that was actually referenced the most in this movie actually. And by the way, all of the references felt very natural and organic and completely justified, and none of them felt like nostalgia bait one bit. Or maybe you could say nostalgia bait done in the right way, but whatever. They all very much made full sense in the story, and I was very happy about it. But ultimately, Toy Story 4, at best I could describe it as a harmless epilogue to the story, or prologue now, seemingly, to the new Toy Story trilogy. But Toy Story 5, I say it's great, it perfectly makes sense the context of the story, and again, it's pretty much a sequel I didn't ever would even think I needed, but ended up having a really good time with it, and I'm very much happy to include it as part of the Toy Story franchise. And now I'm actually hoping they're going to do Toy Story 6, concluding Bonnie's story, just as they did Andy's story. But again, if you're a fan of the Toy Story franchise, then I think Toy Story 5 is very much a movie for you. Toy Story 4, I would say it's very, very debatable. But Toy Story 5, I say, it's great. Maybe not as great as the first three, but still very much a worthy addition. And I'll mention one last thing. No, I already said that Lilliput is not a villain, and I'm going to give another spoiler. There is no main villain here whatsoever, which I think works pretty well because there was no really need for a villain in this story. Like, although, because Toy Story 4 didn't have one either, I'm hoping that maybe Toy Story 6 will actually have a new one, because it's about time now, with the last two movies not having any, but any lack of villain very much made sense in this movie. Once again, I will say it one last time. Toy Story 5 is a very worthy addition to the series, and while I don't think Toy Story 4 was needed, Toy Story 5, I say, very much was, and I'm really surprised, but I might think it's actually better than... I actually might go as far as to say it's the best animated movie of this year, which I'm so happy about. Not only I'm saying not only is the best animated of this movie of this year Pixar movie, but it's a Toy Story movie. Yep. Couldn't be more happy about it. And maybe it's actually among the best Pixar movie in the recent years. I'm not sure if I would go as far as to say it's better than Inside Out 2, that's still possibly my favorite Pixar movie of this decade, but overall, once again, I really enjoyed Toy Story 5, and I'll be glad to see it again, especially with my 7-year-old niece. I think she very much should see this movie. So, thank you guys for checking out this review. Press the like button, please subscribe to this channel, and I'll talk to you soon in another video. Talk to you then, bye!